All right, so today I'll be kind of doing a half-half between some slides and then a little bit of showing you, how CDD kind of fits into this research data management landscape. But the general presentation is, why research data management is important for anyone and especially startups. So most of you on the call have probably seen an image like the one on the left here. You can just take out the drug discovery and imagine idea development. But the general idea is you're iterating on multiple ideas, entities, pieces of IP. You're passing them through multiple steps of a funnel, and then eventually you're ending up with an approved therapy, right? So what does the research data landscape look like along the way? And this is mostly from, our experience here at CDD. So in development of any sort of drug therapy entity, you're developing thousands to millions of these entities along the way. These are the actual iterations of part of the SAR cycle. These are accessory molecules, cell lines, antibodies, reagents, right? You have a whole landscape of objects. You then have multiple assays or experiments, in vivo, in vitro, in silico, that you're running these entities through in order to characterize them. And each of these assays has defined columns of data. Who did it, when it was done, the cell line it was done in, the time, the temperature, etc. You can start seeing the web growing. You then have the rows of data, right? So you have replicate rows, rows of dose response data, and these data rows are being deposited by people from all walks of life within your kind of collaborative network, internal, external, CROs, etc. And then, it's one of my favorite pictures here for some reason, but you've also got a lot of end users with different needs out of research data. Biologists, chemists, project managers, investors, IT personnel. They all need to access the data in some way. And then you've got the unstructured side. So these are your notebooks, your sticky notes from the lab, reports, SOWs, and you need to keep track of all of this. So what I typically see, so before being a product manager at CDD, I was about 3 years on the support side, so helping users get using a research data management platform for the first time. So essentially, you've got data in all of these different forms up top. People think just because they're collecting that data in PDFs, emails, Excel files, PowerPoints, that they have everything they need. But at the end of the day, it's hard to find, and oftentimes it's a hindsight is 2020 type situation, right? You wish you knew who ran the experiment, when they ran it, and you wish you had a few extra pieces of metadata because some scientists forgot to add in a note or the temperature. So now that we've gone over the landscape of research data a little bit, we'll dive into research data management. So just a definition from the NIH, RDM, research data management, is the organization, documentation, storage, and preservation of data from the research process. At the end of the day, you want your data to be fair. A lot of RDM platforms talk about this fair data principle from the Pistoia Alliance. It's basically you want the data to be easily findable. You want to control who can access it, when, and from where. You want it to be interoperable, meaning you can pass that data readily between different software packages and machines. And you want to be able to reuse and reproduce those results over and over and over again. So the key benefits of implementing a research data management strategy are, of course, you're minimizing data loss. So you're protecting the IP and ideas and information you've gathered and generated. You're able to quickly find that data and either analyze it for the first time or apply a new analysis to it because you know where it is. And you can enable yourself to scale as a company, either externally or internally, because you can quickly add users with specific roles to that data set. So some of the common challenges that I spend a lot of my day talking to end users about and people who are storing research data. The first one, of course, is data tracking, handling, and storage. So you're generating all of these ideas, these molecules, these cell lines, these antibodies. Sometimes what I think is molecule number 24, you think is molecule number 26, and vice versa. So you need a unified identification schema with unique checking. Also, when searching for data, you don't want to have to wonder, is it Ralphie, is it Chris, is it John, is it Michael who has this data? You want to know that you can go to a singular platform and find that information. And getting back to, some of these buzzwords of today, AI, machine learning, you really can't enable any AI or machine learning unless under the hood your data is in a machine readable format like JSON, SQL tables. You need to be able to push that data back and forth between models. Another challenge set is regulatory compliance of any sort. So how do you control who is accessing your data from where and when? If you have any sort of like higher level compliance needs like GLP, GMP, 21 CFR Part 11, et cetera, how do you ensure that your processes are actually following those guidelines? And then audit logs and backup. You can give somebody access, but how do you prove that they've had access? How do you prove that they've done something? And in the event of a catastrophic failure, how do you quickly turn over and get all of your data back from, last week, for instance? Collaboration is a big one. So especially in today's more virtual world, we've got partners, CROs, we're leveraging resources from all across the world, distributed workforces, investors in data rooms, people doing diligence. So how do you quickly give access to the right data to all of these people and also allow them to populate it into your data set? And then data presentation. So, you have all of this data in 53 different locations. How are you quickly pulling together a visual dashboard? You're in a meeting with investors, and I'm going to take a little bit of this from conversation Chris and a few of us had last week. But essentially, an investor asks a question. You don't want to have to say, I have to go check with 7 people on my team to get you that answer. You want to know that you can quickly pull up a dashboard, reanalyze the data, and it really becomes a statement of professionalism that you know where your information is and you can quickly pull it together. So essentially being organized, being able to invite people into your data, and also knowing what you have. Those are pretty much the main pieces of challenges we see. And then when you actually implement a proper RDM software, so a software designed to manage research data, these are some of the benefits users start seeing. So this is not just from CDD Vault, but this is just globally. I've used many platforms over the years. You are able to streamline research and development in a startup. Every second counts. You want to optimize your number of SAR cycles or iterations you can run a year. And if you're spending half of your time looking for data and rerunning experiments, you're losing efficiency, time, and your runway can run out easily. So you'll be able to easily search that data because it's in a unified data model. Everybody's accessing a single database, not dispersed data sources, so you have a single source of truth. You'll see this coming up a lot with RDMs. And this is from personal experience, working in the lab for many years. You're not going to rerun experiments just because you didn't know where the data was or where to find it. So you're essentially increasing your efficiency. Data security, this is huge. So RDM softwares, most of them are part of an agile development platform. They're SaaS cloud-based products, so they're constantly being updated and keeping up with any modern infrastructure and security updates. So that's getting into firewalls, encryptions, and backups. You can specifically say, Ralphie's allowed to access this small folder of data with this type of access. He's able to register entities, only assay data, just look at data, just export data. So you can control who's doing what. And then IT teams and teams doing diligence on your software product are really going to love this piece, especially from a lot of calls I've been in. Essentially, these platforms have the ability to add additional security layers like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and IP address restriction without you having to think about it, right? So you can set all of this up. Compliance and reproducibility. So all of your registration, and we'll see an example in a minute, of your entities, so your molecules and your assay data are following a data model with columns that are required. They have data types enabled. So everybody's putting data in following the correct data model, so you can use it later. Your methods, like your SOPs, the way your assays are run, those are all able to be clearly documented so that you can quickly reproduce results. Since it is typically a cloud-based application, this really facilitates collaboration and scalability of your platform. So you have this unified data model you've already set up. You can quickly invite others into this cloud-based environment with the proper roles. Everybody's looking at the same version, and there's no time wasted with emails or wondering where to deposit data. A lot of this process can be automated and used with templates. And then finally, kind of said this a bunch of times, you're really improving decision-making capabilities and efficiency. So you know where the data is, so it's easy to find it and reanalyze it. You can characterize your IP and the white space around it really easily. And then there's an ability to make dashboards to track decision points at every set of your funnel. So this is pretty much high-level overview of research data management, some software benefits really around efficiency, scaling, safety, security of your data. And I'm just going to step ahead for a few into I'm not really going to call it a demo, just a showing of CDD Vault and a few capabilities and how it fits into this kind of research data management. So let me pop up Vault. All right. Can you just thumbs up if you can see this web browser screen? Great. Thanks, John. So CDD Vault is a cloud-based data management platform, so really designed for being in the cloud, collaborating, and essentially from one platform, you deposit your data in. There's multiple modules that allow you to analyze, interact with, and share that data. So you have that single source of truth. And then just logging in and showing you a few key components of CDD's RDM. The first is arguably the most important. It's your activity and registration system. So this is where you're able to register your ideas, your molecules, your nucleic acid and amino acid sequences, your cell lines, and any like chemical formulations or antibody drug conjugates you're doing. So you're registering this idea. Multiple people can deposit their own entities into this system, and Vault will duplicate check them and assign them unique IDs based on their structures or sequence, right? So then you're all on the same page there. You as the company get to define your fields, your metadata fields to actually register these entities. So these are synonyms, barcodes, data files, and you can set up the required data fields so you know everybody's populating the right information. And all in the same line, I've got assay data. So from one search, I've been able to pull up a molecule and then an inhibition run and dose response run from two separate people on my team. So all of that data is being populated under this unified model. CDD Vault will even go as far as taking a raw data file from your plate reader, extracting the appropriate information, and fitting that data to a normalized dose response curve in this example. And you can actually even overlay different molecules or leads. So you've gone from raw data to analyzed publication quality results in a matter of seconds, really, making you kind of an efficient machine there. Pulling back this data is just as easy. It's hypothesis driven. You're in a database with a specific user role, access to certain projects, and you say, I want to find any molecule fitting this search criteria, in or not in a section of assays. You can search your structures and your sequences. You can also search metadata, barcodes, synonyms, etc. And this whole search, in this case, gave me 8 results, and I can actually save this as a dashboard. So talking about decision points, you can make a very specific search with your hit criteria for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, ADME, etc. And you can save these reports as live actionable search results that you can get back to and other people on your team can get back to in the future. You've also got the ability right within the system to index your inventory. So if you've got many tubes of all of your entities stored in different locations, you can store that all here so everybody's on the same page. You have enough to send off to this CRO and that partner in order to do a study. This structured data can also be sent into our data visualization tool. So from this report, I click this one button and you've now got a very powerful tool to analyze. I think it's up to 45 parameters at once with different scatter plots, bar charts, and histograms. So you can look at multiple components at once. These dashboards, talking about presenting, to external partners, investors, etc., you can actually save these, get back to them over and over and over again, and they'll actually reanalyze new data for you. So that's all of the high-level structure. And then I'll just spend another minute showing you the unstructured side of the database here. We've been spending all of our time in this explore data section. That's the really, segmented, regimented rows and columns. But for all the other stuff, you've got the lab notebook. You've got purpose, materials, and methods, linking to your reagents. You can upload any type of data file you want, and there's nice file previews right in the system. You've also got an Office integration that allows you to edit and import structured data from the lab notebook to the registry. And then there's the capability to register biological, chemical entities, as well as chemical reactions. This lab notebook. And probably the best part is you can have multiple people in a singular notebook at once. So a lot of people use this to give their CROs access. You're in this, kind of complex environment, but at least you can go to this one nice, neat notebook page, and you can find all of the most recent data from your CRO that they've been depositing. So with that, a little whirlwind tour of CDD and research data management. I'll wrap up here. Thank you for your time on this, and I'll pass it over to Chris.
My name is Chris. I am the CEO of Treventis. My background is in computational chemistry. I've been working for over 20 years in drug discovery and development across therapeutic areas. I've done some work in infectious disease as well as oncology, but a lot of my career I've been working in central nervous system at the intersection of the science side and the business side. Along the way, getting a credential in intellectual property. I'm a U.S. registered patent agent, and also building my knowledge of business development and deal making, which I've used with great effect at Treventis. Treventis being something that was co-founded with University of Toronto professor Donald Weaver and Mark Reed, in which, as I say, I serve as CEO. We have laboratories in the Discovery District. And at Treventis, we focus on small molecules that are inhibitors of protein misfolding to attack the source of so much pathology and disease progression in various human diseases. These are broadly represented as protein misfolding diseases, I might refer to as PMDs, and they exist across therapeutic areas, but clearly a lot of these diseases are those that involve neurodegeneration, and Alzheimer's is a prototypical example. It is an unusual target space because these targets that you're going after are what you might call intrinsically disordered. They don't have an ordered shape, and therefore they are constantly changing their conformations. And in a misfolding disease, what you have is a continuum of what's essentially, from a chemistry perspective, a polymerization of misfolding proteins. So they clump together to form soluble oligomeric species starting from the monomer, and ultimately build to such sizes that they become insoluble fibrillar aggregates. And notoriously, this is in Alzheimer's disease, the beta amyloid plaques and the tau tangles. So there's been a lot of work on going after the end stage aggregates, but that's not a perfect solution because I think the field appreciates now it's really driven more by the oligomers. So you might say remove the oligomers, but then there are so many different kinds of oligomers that taking any one species out of the equation might not be enough. So what you really want, and what we've been focused on at Treventis, is the aggregation problem at its source. What we really want to do is focus on attacking the misfolded monomer that is critical path to forming oligomers. But until we got thinking about this, I think most people in the field didn't really have a good notion of how you might do rational drug design against an intrinsically disordered, unusual target like this. And that's really where Treventis' platform for PMD drug design really shines. We have a core technology built around physics-based models of misfolding and aggregation that we built and experimentally validated for several types of misfolded proteins. This is a platform that we call CCM, or Common Conformational Morphology, which you can use as a kind of virtual crystal structure to identify drug-like starting points and then optimize drug leads against misfolded targets. It's the front end of a drug discovery workflow that we built specifically to look at optimizing and experimentally validating potential therapeutic molecules for the capability of modifying disease in PMDs. We've developed cell-free, cell-based ex vivo and in vivo tools that are special within this kind of unusual workflow. And that allows us to run the gamut really from zero to preclinical candidate in a given protein misfolding disease and build out a pipeline of drugs focused on these kinds of diseases. Most notably, the work we're doing in Alzheimer's disease. We struck a partnership deal with Japanese pharma Takeda last spring, which has been really accelerating our efforts at Treventis. And we're all very excited about what's going on and what's to come and all the things we're doing in our pipeline. But of course, you didn't come to this webinar to hear about Treventis. You want to hear about RDMs, setting the stage for what Treventis did and the challenges and opportunities that I've seen within Treventis, as well as other things I've done in biotech that can be greatly simplified and improved by use of a good RDM infrastructure. So I'll start with the obvious improvements, and Ralphie's gone through a lot of this stuff in a lot more detail. But I've been in the industry long enough to know that everyone used to have a very decentralized or just plain unorganized data framework. In the parlance of today, it was very unfair. You had paper lab notebooks, you had Excel spreadsheets with inscrutable formulas in them, and to answer even simple questions about what data was available for what compound was challenging. I will speak hypothetically that you could potentially be in a situation where you accidentally gave two compounds the same code number, or a compound was known by two different synonyms within your lab, but people weren't talking to each other about that and only realized later that that was the case. Or particularly on the chemistry side, if you've got the stereochemistry wrong on something and you thought you were making one particular chiral molecule, and in fact the number you were using was for the other chiral molecule. So that created all kinds of like data integrity questions. Mistakes are easy to make in a framework where you have a database that isn't chemically aware. If you happen to have one that's chemically aware, in the old days, those were always single user systems. They were slow. Anybody who had access to the system, which is basically anyone who had access to the keyboard, could potentially make a change to the system and blow it all up. And security, in as much as it existed, was basically just lock the door where the computer was in. So contrast that to today. I mean, we have lots of different offerings in this RDM field. I have used a number of them. CDD Vault happens to be my favorite, but regardless of which one you use, the real strength in this, I think everybody appreciates, is that it takes a lot of the hassle out of administering a data storage environment that will be secure, that will be multi-user, that gives you the data integrity that you're looking for, and peace of mind that the data is organized and it's safe. We can all be glad about that. That's something that is pretty clear from what Ralphie had talked about. And in terms of R&D use cases, I can only just say, yes, I completely agree. Certainly, an RDM allows you to say, I'm going to register a compound. It will have an unambiguous number. New batches of the compound will be pushed under that number. You'll know at a glance, based upon material information, if you're keeping track of your inventory, to say, well, do I have enough of this material already made to complete the next experiment, or going to have to make some more? You can provide the primary data at everyone's fingertips. Anybody who needs to see it, you can control the view. You can bring in your collaborators and CROs and so forth. And hopefully everyone in the R&D space can come into the RDM and use some kind of data visualization to identify, let's say, structure-activity relationships, make new research insights, and so forth. That part, I think, is pretty clear. But I think there's pretty good reasons why the executive suite needs to think about RDMs as well. Because in biotech, as in any business, but particularly in biotech, the business goals are driven by scientific goals. in many cases, but it actually should be the other way around. The business goals should drive your scientific goals. Your IP goals, your technology development goals should be driven by the business goals, which is in part driven by the values of the company and in part by the audience you need to get to. At Treventis, our goals at the outset were driven by venture capital audiences. Gradually, we layered in the concerns of customer audience as well. So that would mean like the pharmaceutical partner audiences. And those are slightly different, but fundamentally, whether you're talking to an investor or you're talking to a potential pharmaceutical partner, they both want to know that your platform is protectable, that your products are protectable, and in this case, I'm talking about small molecule compounds, but that could be basically any modality you're working on. And that you have a well thought out approach to selecting your candidates to go into the clinic. In effect, you want to articulate that the R&D function of your company is a well-oiled machine that generates assets for monetization. Because ultimately, I mean, although I wouldn't want to work in this business if not for the significant societal benefit. From a company perspective, the ultimate business goal is to make money. And for life sciences companies, that means you turn your IP into revenue somehow. So for many therapeutics companies, that means striking some kind of deal at some kind of stage with big pharma. So these are, to use some kind of MBA speak, I mean, you look at the net present value adjusted for risk, and from that basis, you can then layer in things around what the revenue potential is and when the money is going to come. So-called upfront fees, option exercise, R&D milestones, clinical milestones, regulatory milestones. Hopefully you get a royalty position on the products actually sold. There's revenue models being built around the expected patent term and the period in which you can do this, because once the patent expires, the numbers will go down in terms of the revenue. And there's a lot of things that go into that, including the time value of money associated with getting to the first commercial sale and so forth, all of the different risks associated with this. Yeah, you need to understand this as well as your partner to strike a good deal. But I think the first place we often have to start is really to understand what the deal is going to be. What is it that you're going to be licensing? And generally speaking, the first step of this will be you will have some, initial, outreach and everything, and you get used to dealing with the partner. You run some kind of a process to get to the point where they have a comfort level, and then they're going to build out a term sheet, which is preparatory to a definitive agreement. So this has a lot of different elements to it in terms of the defined terms, what the territories, the fields, the targets, the patents in question, and so forth. Some of these things are not really RDM driven, but some of them I think could very much benefit from diving into your RDM. Clearly, from the perspective of a partner, they got to understand the market, geography, field, and market analysis of a specific disease indication is really important, but it's usually baked into the focus areas of a particular VC or pharma partner, so that you should understand that, but you don't necessarily have to work so hard to sit yourself in that aspect of it. But then when you get into what you might consider the secret sauce of your company, when you have to talk even in generalities about what it is that you do internally that makes you different and what makes you have a competitive advantage, then you're now in a position where you need to articulate specifically things about what you're doing. But when it comes to platform, I've always found that the comfort level, internally might just not be there to show off items that we would consider trade secret. So you got to argue for the value of these things through showing off their capabilities. You have to build case studies. Maybe you build a white paper. Maybe you build various like PowerPoints talking about the capabilities of your platform and how it builds into products. And an RDM can put you in good stead to quantify and illustrate the special capabilities of whatever you're doing with your platform. When it comes to your compounds, which is what we were focusing on, but insert biologic or oligo or whatever in the way you're thinking about this. I think to a certain extent, when it comes to pharmaceutical and VC diligence, there's always going to be a reluctance on everybody's part to look at structures for the first bit of the conversation. But Um, at least in generalities, partners will want to understand as much as practical what kind of patent coverage you have, what the mechanism of action is, what's the stage of development of what you've got, and then diving into things like what is the richness of the compound data available, especially on your lead molecules, as well as the breadth of coverage around your lead candidates in case backups are necessary. And delving into an RDM will allow you to find use cases for this. For example, if you have several classes of compounds, each of which is covered by a different patent family, then you'll have what they call in the field a marquouche. You'll have this sort of generic structure that in the claim language will describe potentially hundreds of thousands of compounds. You won't have made hundreds of thousands of compounds, but your partner will probably want to know how many have you made. Using chemically aware RDM software, you can do substructure searches, and you can say, well, I've made 325 compounds that match this marquouche, and in fact, I can then further look at that and say 185 of them were active to a certain threshold of cell-free IC50, and that gives a partner more comfort that you have thoroughly looked at a specific aspect of the chemical space. And then when you start getting into de-risking it further, it's not unusual to also have to consider things which are similar to what it is that you're doing. You might query the RDM and say, okay, well, let's say these compounds in this particular marquouche here we call category A, and you've made 500 of those, but there are another 100 which are similar, and in fact you can quantify how similar. You can use a formalism that's built into an RDM to say, I have compounds that are 90 to 100%, or just under 100%. The stuff which is nearly the same by Tanimoto, for example, and then show that they have similar activity profiles, then allows you to sort of define in an aggregate sense a kind of almost category A compound class or something, or maybe call it category B or whatever you need to in order to articulate what the backup class might be in that area. That's one of the strongest things about an RDM is that you can look for a compound and you can learn all the things about when it came along and compare it to what came before and tell the story about how it is you got to where you are from an SAR and a lead optimization perspective. Speaking of chemistry and speaking of patents, another use case that people might not think about is particularly with the registration module, but also in the ELN, you will be able to find out, and looking at it even years later, who was the person who was making the compound. And that may be important to give you context for inventorship on a patent, because when you start getting into your clinical candidates and you want to get patents on file and so forth, knowing who the inventors are is a critically important thing about filing a patent. And that's often difficult to determine after the fact, especially if the material was in various people's paper lab notebooks. I can tell you, I've been through the process of trying to determine who was it who made that compound originally, and what are the minutes from the meeting to say was it their idea and so forth, and actually finding the page in some paper notebook from years ago. You don't want to go there. It's better to be organized at the front. Speaking of organization, no doubt, whatever modality you're using, you're going to want to try to tie together the context for what your funnel looks like, what your screening tree looks like. This is a redacted version of something we might use if we're looking at in a CNS program, being able to show that a compound was active in primary and secondary in vitro screens, and then moving into looking at ADME and looking at concentration of the compound in target tissue and so forth, which in this case was brain. And if you have an RDM in place, then you can query the RDM on a particular project. You can define a group of things which are recently identified things using the saved searches, or if you have a specific like substructure which is closed, you could make that a collection, or you can just do basically if statement type queries against your collection for a given project, and then get the information that you need to be able to say what compounds are at what point on tree we were just looking at, and then be able to quantify it in a nice funnel to a partner. Again, in the aggregate, you're not generally sharing structures to to all of your partners or to VCs, but to be able to create something like this and back up the numbers to it, I think is a very strong message to a partner that you have an organized approach to doing discovery, and that you have an organized approach to your data management that you can then use to support from a reputational perspective, the idea that this is ultimately going to be a competent and de-risked approach to doing drug development and whatever therapeutic area or indication you're looking at. So anyway, to sum up, I think beyond the typical R&D use cases, which we've talked about, people should consider about an RDM, there are also some business development, licensing, and IP considerations that can drive value across a whole scientific organization and enhance your overall chance of success in finding a path to the market in what is a very difficult area. And I think RDMs can really help make the case, in a lot of these situations. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone for joining, and of course to our speakers here and to CDD Vault for our continued partnership. It's very much appreciated.